High society thrives on a very specific kind of cruelty. They smile in your face, drink your champagne, and tear you to shreds the moment you turn your back. For years, Jana Higgins was their favorite punchline, the overweight, unassuming girl who somehow landed a handsome, rising star fiancé. When he publicly dumped her at the biggest gala of the season for a size 0 model, the elite laughed, assuming Jana would simply vanish into obscurity. They didn't know that the most feared man in Chicago's underworld, Kenna Castelli, was watching from the shadows. And they definitely didn't know that 3 months later, they would all be forced to bow to her. The Gold Coast ballroom of the Drake Hotel was a sea of shimmering silk, clinking crystal, and whispered venom. Jana Higgins stood near the extravagant ice sculpture, acutely aware of how much space she took up. At 26, Jana was undeniably fat. It wasn't baby weight, and it wasn't a temporary phase. She was a soft, heavy woman in a room full of sharp, angular people. Her dress, a deep emerald green, was a custom creation she had sewn herself, simply because the boutiques on the Magnificent Mile didn't cater to a size 22. She was only here for Bradley. Bradley Henderson was a junior partner at Sterling and Hayes, a corporate law firm with ties to everyone who mattered in Chicago. He was handsome, ambitious, and for the last 3 years, Jana's fiancé. Or so she thought. "You look tense, Jana," a voice purred. It was Joy Davies, a woman whose collarbones were as sharp as her tongue. Joy was a real estate heiress, built like a runway model and completely devoid of empathy. "Are you sure you shouldn't sit down? Your ankles look a little swollen." Jana forced a polite smile, her cheeks burning. "I'm fine, Joy. Just waiting for Bradley's speech." Bradley had organized this charity gala, ostensibly to raise money for pediatric research, but everyone knew it was a stepping stone for his political aspirations. Jana had spent months organizing the silent auction, coordinating the caterers, and ensuring the floral arrangements were flawless. Suddenly, the jazz band stopped playing. Bradley stepped up to the microphone at the center of the room. He looked immaculate in his Tom Ford tuxedo. The crowd of 500 socialites, politicians, and business moguls fell silent. "Ladies and gentlemen," Bradley began, his voice echoing through the opulent room, "thank you all for being here. Tonight is about the future, about looking forward and making difficult but necessary decisions." Jana beamed, feeling a swell of pride. But then, Bradley's eyes locked onto hers, and his smile vanished. It was replaced by a look of profound, cold detachment. "For the past 3 years, I have been tied to a woman who, well, let's just say, she doesn't fit the picture of where I am going," Bradley said smoothly. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Jana's heart stopped. The blood drained from her face. "Jana," Bradley said, pointing directly at her. Every head in the ballroom turned. 500 pairs of eyes stared at her, judging her round face, her thick arms, her very existence. "I'm sorry, but I can't do this anymore. I cannot marry you. I need a partner who matches my ambition, a partner I can be proud to stand next to." He reached out his hand, but not toward Jana. From the front row of the crowd, Joy Davies stepped forward, wearing a triumphant, predatory smirk. She took Bradley's hand and stepped up onto the stage. "Joy and I have been seeing each other for the past 6 months, Bradley announced, entirely unashamed, "and I realize now what a real partnership looks like." The silence in the room broke into a horrific crescendo of murmurs, stifled giggles, and outright laughter. They were laughing at her. Jana felt the air leave her lungs. The humiliation was a physical weight, crushing her chest. She had given this man everything. She had typed his briefs when he was in law school, paid his rent when he was broke, and loved him unconditionally. and he had used her public destruction as a theatrical prop to launch his new power couple status. Tears blurred her vision. She couldn't breathe. Gina turned and pushed her way through the crowd. People didn't even try to hide their snickers as she shoved past them. "Look at her waddle," a woman whispered, loud enough for Gina to hear. "I always wondered how long Bradley would put up with a whale like that." Gina burst through the heavy mahogany doors of the ballroom and ran down the carpeted hallway, heading straight for the side exit. She burst out into the frigid Chicago night air, the rain immediately soaking her meticulously styled hair and her emerald dress. She collapsed against the brick wall of the alleyway, sobbing uncontrollably. She was so consumed by her grief that she didn't notice the sleek, armored black Maybach idling in the shadows. She didn't hear the heavy car door open, nor the sound of expensive leather shoes splashing against the wet pavement. "Henderson is a fool," a deep, gravelly voice cut through the sound of the rain. Gina gasped, her head snapping up. Standing over her was a man who seemed to swallow the ambient light of the alley. He was tall, dressed in a bespoke, charcoal three-piece suit that screamed old money and hidden violence. His hair was pitch black, slicked back, and his eyes were a piercing, unforgiving shade of slate grey. Gina recognized him instantly. Anyone who read the local papers or watched the news knew his face. Kenna Castelli. He was the head of the Castelli syndicate, a man who controlled the docks, the unions, and, allegedly, half the judges in Cook County. He was a phantom, a myth, a monster. "Go away," Gina choked out, trying to wipe the mascara from her cheeks. "Haven't I been a good enough show for one night?" Kenna didn't leave. He pulled a pristine white silk handkerchief from his breast pocket and held it out to her. "I don't find the public butchering of loyalty entertaining, Miss Higgins. I find it deeply offensive." Gina stared at the handkerchief, then at him. "How do you know my name?" "I know everything that happens in this city," Kenna said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "I know Bradley Henderson just humiliated you to elevate himself, and I know you are currently thinking about disappearing." "I am going to disappear," Gina said bitterly, snatching the handkerchief. "I'm going to pack my bags, leave Chicago, and never look at these people again." Kenna stepped closer. The aura of danger around him was palpable. "Running away proves them right. It confirms you are exactly the weak, pathetic creature they think you are." Gina felt a spark of anger ignite through her sorrow. "Excuse me. You don't know me. You don't know what it's like to be looked at with disgust every single day of your life just because of how you look." "Perhaps not," Kenna conceded, his slate eyes narrowing. "But I know what it's like to have people underestimate me, and I know how to destroy them for it. Stand up." Gina hesitated, then used the brick wall to push herself up. She was soaked, shivering, and stripped of all dignity. Yet, looking into Kenna Castelli's eyes, she felt a strange magnetic pull. "I have a proposition for you, Gina Higgins," Kenna said quietly, the rain bouncing off his broad shoulders. "One that will ensure Bradley Henderson, Joy Davies, and every parasite in that ballroom will never dare to look down on you again." 10 minutes later, Gina found herself sitting in the plush, heated leather seats of Kenna's Maybach. Across from her sat the Mafia boss, pouring a glass of amber liquid from a crystal decanter built into the console. "Drink. It will stop the shivering," Kenna ordered, handing her the glass. It was a rare, peaty scotch that burned its way down her throat, warming her core. "What do you want from me, Mr. Castelli?" Gina asked, clutching her damp dress around her knees. "I don't have money. I don't have connections. As you just witnessed, I don't even have a fiancé." Kenna leaned back, studying her with a calculating gaze. "My life is complicated. The FBI has formed a new task force led by Special Agent Thomas Vance. Kenner paused, correcting himself mentally. Led by Special Agent Richard Hughes. They are building a RICO case against my family. At the same time, the Irish syndicate on the south side is testing my borders. Jaina blinked, entirely out of her depth. And this involves an overweight estate appraiser. How? Because of optics, Kenner said plainly. Right now, the narrative is that I am a ruthless, unstable, violent bachelor. A predator. Hughes is using that image to paint me as a menace to society, making it easier to convince judges like Harrison Caldwell to sign wiretap warrants. Kenner leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. I need to change the narrative. I need to become a family man, grounded, stable, respectable. I need a wife. Jaina almost laughed, but the terrifyingly serious look on his face stopped her. So go hire a supermodel. I'm sure half the women in that ballroom would kill to marry a billionaire, regardless of where the money comes from. If I marry a supermodel or a socialite, the feds will see right through it. They will say it's a transaction. A trophy, Kenner explained, his eyes dropping to Gina's full figure before meeting her gaze again. But you are the exact opposite of what the world expects me to choose. You are ordinary. You are soft. You are the kind of woman a man marries for one reason only: genuine love. Jaina felt a flush of indignation. So, I'm the perfect, pathetic cover story. The ultimate prop. Do not insult yourself, Kenner snapped, his voice cracking like a whip. You are not pathetic. You are a woman who built a life with a parasite, only to have him feed on you. I am not offering you a position as a prop. I am offering you a partnership. A legal, binding marriage. He pulled a leather portfolio from the seat beside him and set it on the table between them. Sign a contract with me. 2 years. You will live in my home, bear my name, and act as my devoted wife in public. In exchange, you will have unrestricted access to my wealth. You will have a security detail that will make you untouchable. And most importantly, Kenner's lips curved into a dark, predatory smile. I will hand you the ruin of Bradley Henderson and Joy Davies on a silver platter. Gina stared at the portfolio. It was madness. She was a quiet girl who liked reading historical biographies and appraising Victorian furniture. She wasn't cut out for the Mafia. She wasn't cut out for a fake marriage with a man who probably had bodies buried under his golf course. What happens if I say no? She asked quietly. I open the door, you walk to the train station, and you go back to a life where people treat you like garbage, Kenner stated coldly. And Bradley Henderson goes on to become a state senator. The image of Bradley's smug face, of Joy's mocking laugh, flashed in Gina's mind. A deep, dormant rage awoke inside her. Society had rejected her. Society had decided her worth was intrinsically tied to the size of her waist. Why should she play by society's rules anymore? Jaina reached forward, her trembling hand grasping the heavy gold fountain pen resting on top of the portfolio. She flipped it open. The contract was dense, filled with legalese about non-disclosure and asset division. She didn't bother reading it. She flipped to the last page and signed her name with a sharp, aggressive stroke. Kenner watched her, a flicker of genuine respect lighting up his dark eyes. Welcome to the family, Mrs. Castelli, he murmured. Over the next 4 weeks, Gina's world was violently upended. True to his word, Kenner moved her out of her cramped apartment in Logan Square and into his sprawling, fortress-like estate in Lake Forest. She was assigned a personal security detail, 2 massive men named Rocco and Silver, who followed her like heavily armed shadows. Kenner was a ghost in the house. He worked late, took meetings in his soundproof study, and only saw Jaina during brief, orchestrated public outings. They were photographed having dinner at a Linnea. They were spotted walking in Millennium Park. Kenna was an incredible actor. In front of the cameras, he looked at Jaina with a tender, protective gaze that made her heart betray her with a sudden flutter. In private, he was polite, distant, and intensely focused on his war with the feds. But the real shockwave hit Chicago when the engagement was formally announced in the Chicago Tribune. The city's elite lost their collective minds. Gina's phone, which she had kept, exploded with text messages from the very friends who had abandoned her at the gala. They were bewildered. Jenna Higgins, the fat girl Bradley dumped, marrying Kenna Castelli. The rumor mill spun out of control. Some said Jaina had dirt on Kenna and was blackmailing him. Others said Kenna had suffered a brain injury. No one could fathom that a man of his power, wealth, and dangerous allure would voluntarily choose a woman who looked like Jaina. Bradley Henderson was the most unhinged of all. He cornered Jaina one afternoon outside the antique shop where she still insisted on working a few days a week. "What is this, Gina?" Bradley demanded, stepping into her path as she left the shop. He looked frantic. "Is this some kind of sick joke to get back at me?" Before Jaina could answer, Rocco's massive hand clamped down on Bradley's shoulder, squeezing with enough force to make the lawyer whimper. "Remove your hand from my wife, Mr. Henderson," a chilling voice echoed. Kenna stepped out of his car, adjusting his cuffs. He walked up to Bradley, completely ignoring the lawyer's panicked expression, and wrapped an arm possessively around Jaina's thick waist. He pulled her flush against his hard body. "Jaina!" Bradley stammered, his eyes darting to Kenna in sheer terror. "You can't be serious about this. He's a criminal. He's a monster." "He's my fiancé," Jaina said, her voice steady, shocking even herself. She leaned into Kenna's warmth. "And unlike you, Bradley, he knows how to keep a promise. Now get out of my way, before my husband-to-be decides you're trespassing on his patience." Kenna's chest rumbled with a dark chuckle. He leaned down and pressed a kiss to Jaina's temple, his lips lingering against her skin just a second longer than strictly necessary for a performance. "You heard the lady, Henderson. Run along. And if you ever approach her without an invitation again, they won't find enough of you to fill a briefcase." Bradley practically tripped over his own feet as he fled down the street. Gina watched him go, a massive wave of satisfaction washing over her. She looked up at Kenna, expecting him to drop his arm and walk away. But he didn't. He kept his arm securely around her waist. "You handled that well, mia sposa," he murmured softly. "I had good backup," Jaina replied, her heart pounding frantically against her ribs. She was starting to realize that the most dangerous thing about Kenna Castelli wasn't his guns or his money. It was the way he made her feel seen. The wedding was set for the first week of November. Kenna did not believe in half measures. If they were going to put on a show, it was going to be the greatest theatrical production Chicago had ever seen. He rented out the entirety of the Cathedral of the Holy Name. Jaina expected Kenna to hire a team of stylists to force her into a corset, to try and shrink her down to fit the aesthetic of a billionaire's bride. She braced herself for the inevitable humiliation of dress shopping. Instead, Kenna flew in an exclusive couturier from Milan, an older woman named Madame Rossi. When Madame Rossi arrived at the estate, she didn't bring measuring tape meant to judge. She brought silks, laces, and tulle. "Mr. Castelli gave me very specific instructions," Madame Rossi said, examining Jaina with an artist's eye. "He said you are not to be hidden. He said you are to be framed like a Renaissance painting. We do not shrink, Miss Higgins. We conquer." When Jaina finally saw herself in the mirror on her wedding day, she burst into tears. The dress was a masterpiece of ivory Mikado silk. It featured an off-the-shoulder neckline that highlighted her generous curves, pulling in tightly at her natural waist before exploding into a dramatic, sweeping ball gown skirt. It didn't make her look thin. It made her look regal. It made her look like a queen. "You look." Jaina turned. Kenna was standing in the doorway of her bridal suite. He was dressed in a custom, midnight blue tuxedo, looking like a dark god of the underworld. He stopped dead in his tracks, his eyes slowly traveling from the diamond tiara, resting in her dark hair, down to the hem of her gown. For the first time since she had met him, Kenna Castelli looked genuinely speechless. "I look like a Mafia wife," Jaina joked nervously, trying to break the tension. Kenna stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. He walked toward her with slow, deliberate steps until he was standing mere inches away. He reached up, his rough, calloused fingers gently tracing the line of her bare shoulder. A shiver racked her body. "You look breathtaking," he said, his voice dropping an octave. This wasn't the tone of a man executing a business contract. The hunger in his eyes was raw and terrifyingly real. "The men out there today, they are going to look at you and wonder how a demon like me managed to capture an angel." "Kenna," Jaina whispered, her breath catching. "Let's go show them who you belong to," he said, offering his arm. The cathedral was packed to the rafters. Kenna had explicitly instructed his consigliere to send invitations to everyone who had been at the charity gala. They were all there, the socialites, the corrupt politicians, the mocking heiresses. And, sitting in the fourth row, were Bradley Henderson and Joy Davies. When the organ music swelled and the massive wooden doors opened, the entire congregation stood up. They turned, expecting to see a joke. They expected to see the fat girl waddling down the aisle, looking ridiculous in a dress meant for someone else. Instead, they saw Jaina. She walked down the aisle with her head held high, the magnificent silk of her dress gliding over the marble floor. Gasps echoed through the cavernous church. The whispering stopped dead. Women who had mocked her weight openly stared in sheer, jealous disbelief. Jaina radiated power, beauty, and an untouchable confidence that Kenna had awakened within her. As she passed the fourth row, Jaina briefly locked eyes with Bradley. The color had completely drained from his face. He looked at her not with pity, but with a profound, agonizing realization of what he had thrown away. Joy, sitting next to him, looked absolutely livid, her own designer dress suddenly looking cheap and insignificant compared to Jaina's royal entrance. Kenna was waiting at the altar. When Jaina reached him, he took her hand, his thumb stroking her knuckles. The ceremony was a blur of Latin prayers and incense. When the priest finally said, "You may kiss the bride," Jaina prepared for the polite, staged peck they had practiced. But Kenna didn't stick to the script. He cupped her face with both hands, his thumbs tangling in her hair, and pulled her in. His lips crashed onto hers with a fierce, possessive intensity that sent a shockwave of heat straight to her core. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a claim. It was a warning to every person in that room that she was his. Jaina gasped against his mouth, her hands instinctively flying up to grip the lapels of his tuxedo as she kissed him back with equal fervor. When he finally pulled away, leaving her breathless and flushed, he turned to the congregation. His cold, slate eyes swept over the crowd, daring a single person to snicker, daring a single person to doubt the reality of their union. Absolute silence reigned. They were terrified. They were awestruck. At the reception, held at the Shed Aquarium, which Kenna had rented out completely, the power dynamic of Chicago high society officially shifted. people who had once pretended Jaina didn't exist were now lining up to pay their respects to the new Mrs. Castelli. Politicians practically bowed to her. Jaina was sitting at the head table, sipping champagne, when she saw Joy Davies marching toward her. Joy had clearly had too much to drink, her face flushed with angry red splotches. "I don't know what kind of voodoo you pulled, Jaina," Joy hissed, slamming her hands down on the table. "But everyone knows this is a sham. A man like Kenna Castelli doesn't sleep with a pig. He's probably got a mistress stashed away already." The music seemed to halt. The surrounding tables fell dead silent. Jaina froze, the old insecurities threatening to rise up and choke her. Before Jaina could formulate a response, a large hand clamped onto the back of Joy's neck. Kenna materialized out of thin air, his grip on Joy so tight the heiress let out a sharp squeal of pain. "I have a strict rule about vermin in my presence," Kenna said, his voice a low, lethal purr. He looked at his security chief. "Rocco, drag this trash out of my sight and ensure her father's real estate developments on the west side suffer a sudden, catastrophic loss of funding by tomorrow morning." "Kenna, wait, please!" Joy shrieked as Rocco hauled her backward by her arms. Bradley was nowhere to be seen. He had abandoned his new fiancée the moment Kenna stepped in. Kenna ignored her screams. He turned back to Jaina, the murderous rage in his eyes melting away as he looked at her. He knelt down beside her chair, uncaring that his $1,000 trousers were resting on the floor. "Are you all right?" he asked softly, taking her hands in his. Jaina looked at the man who was supposed to be a monster, a man who had married her for a legal loophole, yet was currently treating her like the most precious thing in the world. "I am," Jaina said, a genuine smile breaking across her face. "But Kenna, you didn't have to ruin her family's business." Kenna kissed the palm of her hand. "Jaina, I married you to destroy your enemies. I am simply fulfilling my vows. Now, come dance with your husband." As Kenna led her to the dance floor, holding her close, Jaina realized the terrifying truth. The contract was fake. The marriage was a ruse. But the way her heart pounded against his chest, and the way he looked at her, that was becoming entirely too real. And in the dangerous world of the Castelli family, falling in love was the one twist neither of them had planned for. The honeymoon phase of their tactical marriage was a masterclass in psychological warfare against Chicago's high society, but inside the fortified walls of the Lake Forest estate, a different kind of war was brewing. Kenna's inner circle, the ruthless capos who controlled the city's underground veins, were not as easily blinded by the blinding flash of paparazzi cameras as the public. They saw Jaina not as a queen, but as a liability. She wasn't a hardened Mafia princess bred for the life. She was a soft, civilian antique appraiser. The tension snapped during a mandatory Sunday dinner, a tradition where Kenna's lieutenants gathered to pay respects and discuss the syndicate's ledgers. The dining room, anchored by a massive mahogany table, smelled of rich marinara, roasted garlic, and barely concealed contempt. Sitting to Kenna's right was Salvatore Sal Maroni, a man whose face looked like it had been sculpted with a blunt chisel. Sal controlled the South Side distribution routes and had a notoriously short fuse. "So, Mrs. Castelli," Sal said, around a mouthful of veal, his eyes dragging over Jaina's full figure with undisguised disdain. "Kenna tells us you used to play with old furniture. Appraising, he calls it. Must be nice, sitting around all day looking at dusty chairs while real men bleed for this family." The room went dead silent. Rocco, standing guard by the door, shifted his weight, his hand inching toward his jacket. Kenna's jaw tightened, the silverware in his hand bending slightly under his grip. He opened his mouth to end Sal's breathing privileges, but Gina placed a gentle, manicured hand over his wrist. "It's a bit more nuanced than playing with dusty chairs, Sal," Gina said smoothly, taking a sip of her Barolo. She didn't shrink under his glare. Kenna's confidence was contagious, and she was done letting men make her feel small. "In fact, I find the skills are highly transferable to our current family business." Sal let out a harsh bark of laughter. "Oh, yeah? How's that, sweetheart? You gonna appraise a shipment of weapons?" "No," Gina replied, her voice ringing out, crisp and clear. She set her glass down and leaned forward. "But I can spot a fake when it's sitting right in front of me." She gestured to the painting hanging over the fireplace, a newly acquired piece Sal had proudly gifted to Kenna that evening, claiming it was a lost Renaissance masterwork worth $3 million, which he intended to use to wash a large sum of cash through a shell gallery. "For instance, Sal," Gina continued, her eyes locking onto his, "that painting you brought tonight, you claimed it was a 16th century Venetian oil, but the pigment used in the Virgin Mary's robes is French ultramarine, a synthetic blue that wasn't invented until 1826. Furthermore, the craquelure, the cracking on the surface, is far too uniform. It was baked in an oven, likely no more than 6 months ago." The color drained from Sal's face. He looked at the painting, then back at Gina, stammering, You don't know what you're talking about." "I know exactly what I'm talking about," Gina said coldly. "You bought a forgery, Sal. If you try to run $3 million of syndicate money through a gallery using a painting that any first-year art history student could clock as a fake, the IRS will flag the transaction, and Agent Hughes will have the wire fraud warrant he's been begging for." The silence in the room was absolute. The other capos stared at Gina, their expressions morphing from dismissal to outright shock. She had just saved the syndicate from a massive federal trap, and she had done it by humiliating their most aggressive earner. Kenna slowly turned his head to look at Gina. The pride radiating from his slate-grey eyes was so intense it felt like a physical touch. A dark, wicked smirk played on his lips. "Well, Sal," Kenna whispered, the danger rolling off him in waves, "it seems my wife just saved you from making a very fatal error. I suggest you thank her. And then I suggest you find the man who sold you that painting and ensure he never holds a brush again." Sal swallowed hard, dropping his gaze. "Thank you, Mrs. Castelli." After dinner, when the house was finally empty, Kenna found Gina in the library. She was curled up in a leather armchair, reading. He walked over, poured 2 glasses of scotch, and handed her one. "You were magnificent tonight," he murmured, sitting on the edge of the coffee table facing her. "You gutted him without lifting a blade." "He was trying to make me feel stupid because of how I look," Gina said, taking the glass. "I spent my whole life letting people do that. I'm not doing it anymore." Kenna reached out, his knuckles brushing against her soft cheek. "I never saw a liability, Gina. From the night in the alley, I saw a woman with enough fire to burn this city to the ground. You just needed the match." Gina leaned into his touch, her heart hammering. The lines between the contract and reality were blurring so fast she was getting vertigo. "Kenna, what are we doing?" Before he could answer, the glass window behind Gina shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. "Get down!" Kenna roared. He lunged across the space between them, his massive frame hitting Gina and driving her to the Persian rug, just as a second, suppressed gunshot tore through the leather of the armchair where her head had been a second before. Kenna covered her completely, shielding her body with his own. He drew a sleek black Glock from his shoulder holster in a fluid, terrifyingly practiced motion. The library doors burst open, and Rocco and Silva rushed in, weapons drawn, scanning the darkness outside the shattered window. "Sniper! Tree line, 400 yards out!" Silver yelled into his comms. Kenner didn't move off Jaina until the perimeter was secured. When he finally pulled her up, his eyes were wild, feral. He checked her over frantically for blood. "Are you hit?" "Gina, talk to me." "I'm fine," she gasped, her hands shaking as she clutched his lapels. "I'm okay." "Rocco," Kenner commanded, his voice shaking with a rage so profound it chilled the room. "Find them. I don't care if you have to rip up every street in this city. Bring me the man who took that shot." The assassination attempt changed everything. The estate went into a terrifying lockdown. But the real threat wasn't just the rival Irish syndicate taking shots in the dark. It was the man carrying a gold badge. 3 days later, Jaina was permitted to visit the Art Institute of Chicago, flanked by 4 undercover guards. She was admiring a sundae on La Grande Jatte when a man in a cheap tanned suit stepped up beside her. "It's a masterpiece of pointillism, isn't it?" the man said. Jaina glanced at him. He had tired eyes and a badge clipped to his belt. "Special Agent Richard Hughes, FBI," he said, keeping his voice low. "Don't look at your goons, Mrs. Castelli. Just keep looking at the painting." Jaina's blood ran cold, but she forced herself to stare straight ahead. "If you have a warrant, Agent Hughes, speak to my husband's lawyers. If you don't, you are harassing a private citizen." "Private citizen," Hughes scoffed. "You're married to the devil, Jaina. I know about the gala. I know Henderson dumped you. I know Castelli swooped in and offered you a revenge fantasy. But you have to know he's using you." "My marriage is none of your concern," Jaina said stiffly. "It is when your husband is responsible for extortion, racketeering, and murder," Hughes pressed, sliding a manila envelope onto the bench next to them. "Look inside. It's a list of people who crossed Kenner Castelli and disappeared. He's a monster, Jaina. And when the music stops, you're going to be holding the bag. He will throw you to the wolves to save himself." Jaina looked at the envelope. Doubt, cold and insidious, crept into her mind. She knew Kenner was a criminal, but the man who had shielded her with his own body? The man who kissed her forehead when he thought she was asleep? "I can offer you immunity," Hughes whispered urgently. "Witness protection. A new life. All you have to do is tell me where he's keeping the shipping manifests for the docks. We know he keeps a hard copy at the estate." Jaina closed her eyes. She thought about her old life. The loneliness, the constant humiliation. Then she thought of Kenner, the absolute safety she felt in his arms, the respect he demanded for her. She opened her eyes and looked directly at the FBI agent. "You're wrong about him, Agent Hughes. He doesn't throw his people to the wolves." Jaina let a slow, dangerous smile spread across her face, a smile she had learned from her husband. "He commands the wolves. Have a good day, Agent." She walked away, leaving the envelope untouched on the bench. Jaina didn't tell Kenner about the meeting with Hughes. She knew he would escalate the war, and she wanted to keep him focused. She thought she had handled it. She was wrong. The weak link in the chain wasn't the FBI, and it wasn't a rival mob boss. It was a desperate, ruined man with nothing left to lose. Bradley Henderson was in freefall. When Kenner had destroyed the Davies family's real estate ventures, Joy's father had gone bankrupt, and Joy had subsequently dumped Bradley, blaming him for bringing the wrath of the Castelli family down upon them. Fired from his law firm, blacklisted from every country club in Chicago, Bradley was drowning in debt and bitterness. In his desperation, Bradley reached out to the only people who hated Kenner as much as he did, Liam O'Bannon and the Irish Syndicate. A week before Christmas, Jaina insisted on visiting her old antique shop to drop off holiday bonuses for her former co-workers. Kenner was hesitant, but allowed it, sending Rocco and Silver. It was a setup. As Gina stepped out of the back alley entrance of the shop, a garbage truck slammed into her security detail's SUV, pinning Rocco and Silver inside. Before Jaina could scream, a heavy burlap sack was shoved over her head, and she was dragged into the back of an idling van. She fought like a wildcat, using her weight to throw her attackers off balance, elbowing one man hard enough to hear a satisfying crunch of cartilage, but a sharp needle pierced her neck, and the world went dark. When Jaina woke up, she was tied to a metal chair in a freezing, damp warehouse. The smell of rust and rotting fish told her she was somewhere near the industrial shipyards in Gary, Indiana. Her head pounded. She blinked against the harsh glare of a single overhead bulb. Standing in front of her, looking disheveled and manic, was Bradley Henderson. "Hello, Gina," Bradley sneered, though his voice trembled slightly. "Bradley," Gina rasped, her throat dry. She looked past him and saw 3 large men with tribal tattoos holding assault rifles. "You always were an idiot, but this? Kidnapping a Mafia boss's wife? You are a dead man walking." "I'm taking back my life," Bradley shouted, striking her across the face. Gina's head snapped to the side. She tasted copper. She slowly turned back to look at him, her eyes burning with a terrifying calm. She didn't cry. The old Jaina would have wept. This Jaina just felt a cold, calculating rage. "Liam O'Bannon is going to trade you to Kenner for control of the Southside docks," Bradley explained, pacing frantically. "And I get a cut. I get my money back. I get to leave this city." "Kenner isn't going to trade anything," Jaina said, spitting blood onto the concrete floor. "He's going to tear you apart, piece by piece." "He doesn't care about you," Bradley screamed, grabbing her face. "You're a fat, pathetic joke. You were a joke when you were with me, and you're a joke to him. He's just using you." "Am I?" The voice didn't come from Jaina. It came from the shadows of the warehouse catwalk above them. "Am I?" The voice didn't come from Jaina, and it certainly didn't come from the terrified, pathetic man pacing in front of her. It came from the shadows of the rusted, precarious catwalk suspended 40 feet above the warehouse floor. Bradley froze, his manic pacing coming to a dead halt. The silence that followed was heavier than the freezing draft blowing in off nearby Lake Michigan. His eyes darted upward, squinting into the impenetrable darkness of the rafters. "Who's there?" Bradley's voice cracked, sounding like a frightened child rather than the mastermind of a syndicate kidnapping. He backed away from Jaina, using her tied to the chair form as a makeshift shield. From the darkness above, a single, suppressed gunshot coughed, a quiet thwip that barely echoed. The armed Irish guard closest to Bradley's left side abruptly folded, a clean, dark hole appearing between his eyes before his heavy body hit the concrete with a wet thud. Before the remaining 2 thugs could even raise their assault rifles to the catwalk, the entire front face of the warehouse was obliterated. The heavy, corrugated steel doors didn't just blow off their hinges. They were ripped inward by a breaching charge that shook the very foundation of the building. A blinding flash of white light and a deafening, concussive boom sent Bradley screaming to the floor, his hands clamped over his ears. Gina squeezed her eyes shut, turning her face away from the intense heat and flying shrapnel, but she didn't scream. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but it wasn't from fear. It was from profound, overwhelming relief. Thick, acrid smoke poured into the freezing warehouse, and through the veil of grey, the reapers arrived. Kenner Castelli walked through the fire and dust like a vengeful god of war. He had traded his bespoke Tom Ford suit for black tactical gear, a Kevlar vest strapped tightly over his broad chest, and a matte black HK 416 assault rifle gripped firmly in his hands. Flanking him were Rocco and Silver, both battered, bleeding from the garbage truck collision, but moving with the lethal, synchronized precision of apex predators who had been let off their leashes. The firefight was an execution, lasting less than 15 seconds. Kenna's men moved relentlessly forward, sweeping the room with cutting red laser sights. Short, controlled bursts of gunfire eliminated O'Bannon's remaining thugs before they could squeeze a single trigger. The Irish syndicate's attempt at a power play died bleeding on the dirty floor of Gary, Indiana. "Clear!" Silver barked, his voice hoarse, securing the perimeter. "Clear!" Rocco echoed, kicking a dropped weapon away from a lifeless hand. Bradley was hyperventilating on the floor, curled into a tight, trembling ball amidst the shell casings and pooling blood. He was sobbing, a high-pitched, guttural sound of absolute terror. Kenna didn't even look at him. He let his rifle hang by its tactical sling and crossed the expansive warehouse floor in massive, ground-eating strides. His slate-grey eyes, previously cold and dead while dispensing violence, were completely wild as they locked onto Gina. He dropped to his knees in front of her chair, pulling a serrated combat knife from his thigh sheath. In two swift, precise motions, he sliced through the thick industrial zip ties, biting into her wrists and ankles. "Gina," he breathed. The word was a prayer, torn from a throat raw with smoke and terror. He dropped the knife and pulled her fiercely into his chest, burying his face in the crook of her neck. He was a man who commanded hundreds, a man who instilled fear in federal judges and rival bosses alike. But right now, his massive shoulders were shaking. His hands ran frantically over her arms, her back, the thick curve of her waist, checking for wounds, needing to feel the solid, warm reality of her. "I'm here," Gina whispered, her own voice cracking as she wrapped her arms tightly around his neck. She buried her face in his tactical vest, inhaling the smell of cordite, expensive cologne, and the cold winter air. "I knew you would come. I told him you would." Kenna pulled back just enough to frame her face in his large, calloused hands. His thumb brushed over her cheekbone, stopping dead when he felt the raised, angry red welt where Bradley had struck her. The air in the warehouse seemed to instantly freeze. The desperate, loving husband vanished, replaced in a microsecond by the ruthless head of the Castelli family. Kenna stood up slowly, the terrifying, icy calm settling back over his features. He turned around to face the pathetic heap of a man groveling on the concrete. "Kenna, please! Oh God, please!" Bradley shrieked, pressing his face to the floor, his hands clasped over his head. "Liam O'Bannon made me do it. I owed him money. I didn't want to take her. Please, I'll leave Chicago. I'll never come back." Kenna walked over to him, his heavy combat boots crunching on broken glass. He looked down at the disgraced lawyer, his expression devoid of anything resembling human mercy. "You brought my wife to a slaughterhouse," Kenna stated, his voice a low, lethal purr that carried over the wind. "You tied her to a chair, and you put your hands on her. I'm sorry, I lost everything. You took everything from me," Bradley sobbed, finally looking up, his face smeared with dirt and snot. "She was supposed to be a nobody. You were just using her." Kenna drew the sleek Glock from his hip holster in a fluid, blindingly fast motion. He didn't aim at Bradley's head. He aimed lower. Bang! Bradley's agonizing scream tore through the warehouse as the 9mm hollow-point round shattered his right kneecap. He writhed on the floor, clutching his ruined leg, vomiting from the shock and pain. Kenna holstered the weapon without a second glance. He turned to his head of security. "Rocco." "Yeah, boss," Rocco said, stepping forward, a dark, menacing grin spreading across his bruised face. "Take Mr. Henderson to the old meatpacking facility in Fulton Market, the one we haven't renovated yet," Kenna ordered coldly. "Make sure he understands the exact, agonizing cost of touching what belongs to me. Keep him breathing for at least 3 days. O'Bannon is next." With pleasure, Kenna turned his back on the screaming man. He walked back to Jaina, effortlessly scooping her up into his arms, carrying her bridal style over the carnage and out into the biting winter night. The armored Maybach was waiting, idling warmly on the cracked pavement. He settled her into the plush leather back seat, wrapping a thick cashmere blanket around her trembling shoulders before sliding in beside her and pulling her tightly against his side. The ride back to the fortress-like estate in Lake Forest was silent, save for the soft hum of the engine and the rhythmic beating of Kenna's heart beneath Gina's ear. Hours later, the adrenaline had faded, leaving a deep, aching exhaustion. Gina had stood under the scalding spray of the master bathroom's rain shower until the smell of the warehouse was gone. She emerged wearing a soft, sweeping silk robe, her damp hair falling around her shoulders. Kenna was waiting for her in the bedroom. He had changed into dark sweatpants and a simple black t-shirt, looking uncharacteristically vulnerable. The shadows beneath his eyes were stark. He was sitting on the edge of the massive 4-poster bed, staring at a piece of paper in his hands. Gina's heart seized. She recognized the heavy, cream-colored parchment. It was the contract, the 2-year agreement they had signed in the back of his car. She walked toward him slowly, suddenly more terrified than she had been in the warehouse. Was this the end of the line? Had the kidnapping proven that she was too much of a liability? "The feds are backing off," Kenna said quietly, not looking up from the paper. "Hughes doesn't have the stomach for a gang war, and O'Bannon is currently fleeing to Canada. The optics, the marriage, it served its purpose. I am secure." Gina swallowed hard, forcing herself to maintain her composure. "I understand. I suppose my end of the bargain is fulfilled too. Bradley is ruined. The people who laughed at me will never look me in the eye again." Kenna finally looked up. His eyes were burning with an intensity that pinned her to the spot. Slowly, deliberately, he gripped the top of the contract. With a sharp, violent tear, he ripped the document in half. Gina gasped as he placed the pieces together and tore them again and again, until the legal binding of their relationship was nothing more than a handful of confetti. He let the pieces flutter to the hardwood floor. "I don't want a contract," Kenna said, his voice raw, rough with unchecked emotion. He stood up and closed the distance between them, taking both of her hands in his. "I don't want a business arrangement, Jaina. I don't want an asset." He brought her hands to his lips, kissing her knuckles with a desperate reverence. "When I saw you in that chair, when I realized I was seconds away from losing you, my entire empire meant absolutely nothing. I don't care about the syndicate, or the docks, or the money, if I have to sit in this house without you." Jaina stared at him, tears welling in her eyes, spilling over her lashes and tracking down her cheeks. "Kenna, I love you," the most dangerous man in Chicago confessed, entirely bare, entirely hers. "I think I loved you the moment you looked at me in that alley and told me to go away. You are the smartest, bravest, most beautiful woman I have ever known. I want this to be real. I want you to be my wife, forever. No exit clauses, no expirations." Gina looked at the torn pieces of paper on the floor, and then up into the face of a man who saw every single part of her and decided she was a treasure worth going to war for. She had spent her entire life trying to shrink herself, trying to apologize for the space she occupied. But in Kenna's arms, she didn't want to shrink. She wanted to conquer. "I love you too," Gina whispered, a radiant, tearful smile breaking across her face. "But you should know, Kenna Castelli, I have a very big appetite for life, I take up a lot of space. Kenna let out a deep, genuine laugh, a sound of pure joy that chased the darkness from the room. He pulled her flush against his chest, his hands molding perfectly to the soft, generous curves of her hips. "Take it all, Mia Regina," he murmured fiercely against her lips, right before he kissed her with a consuming, breathless passion. "The whole damn world is yours." The high society of Chicago never fully recovered from the shock. They had tried to bury Jenna Higgins beneath their cruel jokes and rigid beauty standards, expecting her to fade into a tragic, forgotten footnote. Instead, she rose from the ashes of her humiliation to become the undisputed queen of the city's underworld. Alongside Kenna Castelli, a man who worshipped the very ground she walked on and the curves she possessed, Gina ruled with an iron mind and an unbreakable spirit. Bradley Henderson became a ghost story whispered as a warning, while Gina transformed the syndicate from a blunt instrument of violence into a sophisticated, untouchable empire. She proved to a superficial world that true power doesn't come from fitting into a size 0 dress. It comes from knowing your worth, demanding your respect, and having a husband willing to burn down anyone who says otherwise.